Just so we're clear. Ethan leaned forward, his voice dripping with arrogance. We wanted you to know now so there's no confusion later. Everything goes to us. Emma's stomach twisted violently. She blinked, gripping the edge of the polished cherrywood dining table as his words sank in like a blade. Excuse me, she managed. Her voice dangerously low. Her mother sighed as if Emma were being difficult. Your father and I have finalized our will, she said, her tone infuriatingly matter-of-fact. We wanted you to hear it directly from us. The house, the lake cottage, everything is going to Ethan and Olivia. Emma turned to her father, desperate for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of guilt, but his gaze was locked on the silverware in front of him. Avoiding her completely, after a long, suffocating silence, he finally spoke, his voice controlled, rehearsed. Emma, you have to understand our reasoning, he said. You've done extremely well for yourself. Your mother and I are proud of your career, of the success you've built. But Ethan and Olivia, they're still finding their footing. They need more support. Support? Emma repeated, her voice shaking. For years, she had been their support. She had paid their mortgage so they wouldn't lose the house. She had covered Ethan's ever-changing college tuition. She had funded Olivia's expensive hobbies without question. She had even spent $30 renovating the lake house they were now giving away without a second thought. And now, they sat there, telling her she didn't deserve a single thing because she had worked hard? Because she had made something of herself? So this is my reward, she demanded, anger scorching away the last shred of patience. For the tuition bills? The mortgage payments? For every time you called me when you needed money? $30,000 into that lake house. And I get nothing because I didn't need handouts? Her mother shook her head dramatically. This is exactly why we didn't want to tell you. Emma, you always bring it back to money. It's never about family with you. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her lips. It was always about family for me. She shot back. Every sacrifice I made was because of family. Because you asked, Mom. Because you said family sticks together. Ethan scoffed, leaning back in his chair, smug and satisfied. You're acting like some martyr. Nobody forced you to help. You just liked playing the hero. Olivia giggled, twirling a strand of blonde hair around her finger. Her voice sickly sweet. Maybe you thought if you threw enough money at us, Mom and Dad would finally love you as much as they love us. Emma's breath hitched. The cruelty of those words cut deeper than anything. And her parents? They said nothing. They didn't scold Olivia. They didn't correct Ethan. They just sat there, watching as her siblings mocked her, tore her apart like it meant nothing. A realization struck her like ice water. They had never truly loved her, not in the way she had loved them. She had been a provider, a convenience, an ATM. They had taken everything she gave without question, without hesitation, without gratitude. Her heart pounded in her chest. But then, a strange calm settled over her, like the clarity after a storm. You're right, Ethan, she said at last, forcing her voice to remain steady. No one forced me, but from today onward, no one can guilt me into being this family's ATM either. I'm done. Silence. She pushed her chair back and stood abruptly, ignoring the shock on their faces. The scent of garlic and marinara lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the warmth she had hoped for, a warmth that had never truly existed. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and walked out the door. She never looked back. Emma slammed the door of her car shut, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The cold Portland air seeped through the vents. But she barely felt it. She was still burning. Her own family had used her, discarded her, and left her with nothing but a suffocating sense of worthlessness. Her mind replayed the dinner scene again and again, like a cruel loop she couldn't escape. The smug look on Ethan's face, Olivia's amused smirk, her mother's dismissive sigh, the way her father had refused to even meet her eyes. She had given them everything. And in return, they left her nothing. By the time she reached her downtown apartment, her head pounded with exhaustion. But the fury hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown sharper, clearer, crystallizing into something unshakable. She threw her purse onto the kitchen counter, stormed into the living room, and grabbed her phone. With a few taps, she opened her banking app, There it was. The evidence of her years of sacrifice. $1,800 for her parents' mortgage. $600 for their utilities. Thousands of dollars over the years labeled simply as family help. She stared at the numbers, her chest tightening with something between rage and bitter clarity. She had given and given and given, and they had taken without hesitation, without gratitude, and now, they had decided she was disposable. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For years, she had sent these payments without thinking, out of a misguided sense of love and obligation. But now, she saw the truth. She wasn't their daughter. She was their financial safety net. With one decisive click, she canceled the mortgage payment. Another tap, and the utility bill vanished. Then, every recurring transfer she had foolishly set up for them. Gone. A quiet defiance bubbled in her chest as the confirmation messages flashed. For the first time in years, she wasn't their lifeline. She wasn't their backup plan. She was free. She let out a slow, unsteady breath, the weight on her shoulders finally beginning to lift. But she knew this wasn't over. Her family wouldn't let go that easily. And she was right. The first call came the next morning. Her mother's name flashed across the screen. Emma stared at it, her stomach twisting. A part of her, the part that had spent her entire life craving their approval, wanted to answer. But she didn't. Voicemail. Minutes later, a notification popped up. Emma, stop being so dramatic. Her mother's voice oozed irritation through the recording. Call me back. You know family doesn't treat each other like this. A hollow laugh escaped Emma's lips. Family? The word felt meaningless now. By the afternoon, her father called. Then Ethan. Then Olivia. None of them apologized. None of them expressed a single ounce of regret. Instead, it was accusations. You're being petty. You're overreacting. You owe us. Emma, family takes care of each other. She ignored them all. And that's when the threats began. Olivia's voice was dripping with venom in her latest voicemail. So what? You're just gonna cut us off? Mom and Dad are struggling. And you're sitting there in your fancy apartment. Living it up? Wow. Emma, guess we know who you really are now. Emma clenched her jaw, her grip on the phone tightening. For years, they had no problem watching her struggle, canceling vacations, sacrificing relationships, working overtime to cover their expenses. But the moment she stopped, suddenly, she was the villain. No, she was done playing that role. She blocked them all. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, she wasn't checking her phone in anticipation of their next demand. She wasn't constantly calculating how much she could spare for them while still affording her own life. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end. They wouldn't let go that easily. And when their next move came, she would be ready. Emma's phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen counter, the vibrations rattling against the marble surface like an unwelcome intrusion. She didn't need to check to know who it was. She had been expecting this. Her family had been silent for nearly a month after she cut them off. No calls, no texts, no guilt-ridden voicemails from her mother, no arrogant demands from Ethan, no passive-aggressive jabs from Olivia. At first, the silence was a relief, like the first deep breath after escaping a suffocating room. But she knew better than to think it would last. Her family wasn't the type to accept consequences. They were the type to regroup, strategize, and come back with a new plan to manipulate her into compliance. She reached for the phone with slow, deliberate movements and glanced at the screen. Mom. A voicemail notification appeared a moment later. With a sigh, she tapped the screen and held the phone to her ear. Emma, we need to talk. Her mother's voice came through clipped and tense, the usual undertone of exasperation still present. Your father and I thought you would have come to your senses by now. But obviously, we were mistaken. There's a family meeting tonight. You owe it to us to be there. Owe it to them. The phrasing was deliberate, as it always was. A reminder that, in their eyes, Emma's role in the family was not one of love or respect, but of obligation. She could have ignored it. She should have, but against her better judgment. Curiosity gnawed at her. A part of her, buried deep beneath layers of bitterness and exhaustion, still wanted to believe there was something worth salvaging. so she typed a single-word reply. Fine. By the time she pulled into the familiar driveway, dread had settled deep in her gut. The house looked the same as it always had. A perfectly maintained suburban facade masking the dysfunction within. Ethan's flashy motorcycle was parked in the driveway beside Olivia's obnoxiously bright blue SUV. Symbols of entitlement. Both of them purchased with financial gifts from their parents. The same parents who had used Emma's bank account as their emergency fund for years. Her mother opened the door before she could knock, the forced smile barely concealing her irritation. "Glad you decided to come," she said stiffly, stepping aside to let her in. Emma didn't respond, just walked past her into the living room, where the rest of her family was already seated. Her father sat in his usual spot, hands clasped in his lap, eyes weary but unreadable. Olivia was perched on the arm of the couch, scrolling through her phone as if this were just another minor inconvenience in her day. And Ethan was leaning back in the recliner, arms crossed, a smug smirk already curling at his lips. Aunt Diane was there, too. That was unexpected. She sat quietly in the corner, her expression unreadable but her eyes holding something that looked like sympathy. Her presence unsettled Emma. Aunt Diane never involved herself in family disputes. If she was here, it meant something bigger was coming. Her father cleared his throat. "Emma, we called this meeting to clear the air," he began, his tone carrying the forced patience of a man who had already decided his version of events was the only correct one. "Your mother and I thought you would have realized by now that cutting us off was a mistake. Obviously, we were wrong." Emma exhaled slowly, her fists clenching beneath the table. "You cut me off first," she said evenly, "the night you told me I was getting nothing in the will after everything I've done for this family." Her mother rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop exaggerating. Emma, you helped, sure, but it was your responsibility as the oldest. Ethan and Olivia deserve stability. And it's not our fault you chose work over family." Emma laughed, a hollow sound that carried no amusement. "I chose work over family? I built my career because you need my money. I skipped vacations, delayed relationships, worked overtime, not for myself, but for you, for Ethan's tuition, for Olivia's ridiculous hobbies, for your mortgage. I did everything you asked. And you still decided I wasn't good enough to be considered family." "Oh, spare us the dramatics," Ethan scoffed, leaning back with a roll of his eyes. "We never asked for your pity." "That's right," Olivia added, her lips curling into a cruel smirk. "Maybe if you weren't so busy playing the family savior, you'd actually have your own life by now." The words cut deeper than they should have. Not because they were true, but because they came so easily to them. As if years of sacrifice had meant nothing. As if she had never mattered beyond what she could provide. Aunt Diane shifted uncomfortably, but she said nothing. Her silence was as loud as a scream. Emma's hands tightened into fists. The exhaustion, the hurt, the years of being taken for granted boiled over in an instant. She pushed her chair back abruptly, the screech of wood against tile cutting through the tension. "You know what? You're right," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "It was my mistake to believe I mattered here. I won't make that mistake again." She turned toward the door, but her father's voice stopped her in her tracks. "If you walk out now, Emma, don't expect to be welcome back." A bitter smile tugged at her lips. She turned back to look at them. Really look at them, for what she knew would be the last time. "That's fine," she said softly. "I've never felt welcome here anyway." And then she left. The night air was cold, biting against her skin as she stepped outside. The weight in her chest was unbearable, the finality of it settling deep into her bones. But as she reached her car, she didn't look back. She drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past her as her mind replayed every moment. Every cutting word, every unspoken truth. By the time she reached her apartment, she knew there was no going back. She poured herself a glass of wine, the expensive one she had been saving for a special occasion. Somehow, tonight's bitter lesson felt fitting enough. As she settled onto her couch, her phone buzzed again. A message from Olivia. "Thanks a lot. Everyone hates us now. Hope you're proud." Emma stared at the words, feeling nothing. No anger, no regret, Just emptiness. She typed a single reply. I'm done apologizing for your choices. Maybe now you'll finally learn responsibility. She hit send and then, with a deep breath, blocked the number. For the first time in her life, Emma was free. Emma stared at the text message from Olivia. The words a pathetic attempt to guilt her back into submission. Thanks a lot. Everyone hates us now. Hope you're proud. For a long time, she would have agonized over those words. Picked them apart. Searched for a way to make things right. But now she just felt done. There was no anger left. No sadness. No lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, they would finally see her worth. She had wasted too many years waiting for that realization to come. It never had. It never would. She typed a response, her fingers moving with steady certainty. I'm done apologizing for your choices. Maybe now you'll finally learn responsibility. She hit send. Then she blocked the number. The silence that followed was almost deafening. No more incessant calls. No more last-minute financial emergencies that only she could fix. No more manipulative pleas disguised as family concern. Just quiet. She had spent years drowning in obligations, suffocating under the weight of their expectations. And now, with a single action, she had severed the last tie tethering her to them. For the first time in years, Emma felt truly alone, and for the first time, she realized that wasn't such a bad thing. Days passed, then weeks. Life moved forward in the way that it always did. Emma buried herself in work, throwing herself into meetings, projects, and late-night strategy sessions. Her career had always been her safe space, the one thing she had complete control over. And now, without the constant distractions of family drama, she excelled. Promotions that had once felt just out of reach now came easily. Her hard work finally acknowledged and rewarded. She booked a trip to Italy. Something she had dreamed about for years but never allowed herself to do. Every time she had considered it before, there had always been a reason not to. Her mother needed help with the mortgage. Ethan was switching majors again and needed tuition. Olivia had maxed out her credit card and was in tears over how unfair life was. But this time, there was nothing holding her back. Standing on the balcony of her hotel in Florence, overlooking the golden glow of the city at sunset, Emma felt a profound sense of liberation wash over her. The guilt that had always lingered in the back of her mind. The voice that whispered she should be doing more, fixing more, being more, it was gone. And in its place, there was peace. When she returned home, she settled into a new rhythm. One where she prioritized herself for the first time in her life. She joined a hiking group. Spent her weekends exploring trails instead of running errands for ungrateful people. She went out with friends without worrying about her phone blowing up with desperate requests for money. She started dating again, allowing herself to explore relationships without the weight of family obligations hanging over her like a storm cloud. And then, out of nowhere, the rumors started. Aunt Diane called late one evening. Her voice hesitant but filled with quiet urgency. Emma, I need to tell you something. Your mom has been talking, a lot. She's telling everyone you abandoned them. That you stopped helping because you're selfish and didn't want to be part of the family anymore. She's saying you're trying to make them homeless. Emma's grip tightened around her phone. She shouldn't have been surprised. Of course, they wouldn't take responsibility for their actions. Of course, they would rewrite the narrative. Twist the truth until they became the victims and she became the villain. That's ridiculous, she whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper than she expected. They left me no choice. I know that, Aunt Diane soothed, but others don't. A lot of people are siding with them. They think you just cut them off out of greed. Emma closed her eyes, her mind racing. Every sacrifice she had made, every time she had put them first, erased with a single lie. She could picture it now, her mother, feigning heartbreak, lamenting to friends and distant relatives about her ungrateful daughter, spinning the story until it painted her as the abandoned parent, suffering because her daughter was too selfish to care. The anger simmered slowly, building into something she could no longer ignore. For years, she had let them control the narrative. She had let them shape how others saw her. Let them dictate the way she existed within the family. No more. Determined, she sat down at her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a moment before she began typing. She wrote everything. Every mortgage payment. Every tuition check. Every last-minute emergency where she had stepped in. Not because she had to, but because she thought that was what family did. She detailed how they had used her, discarded her, then expected her to keep coming back for more. And she didn't stop there. She wrote about the inheritance. The cruel dinner where they made it clear she was nothing more than a financial safety net to them. She wrote about Liam's vandalism. The threats. The manipulations. She put it all in writing. Laid it bare for the world to see. Her hands shook as she clicked post. The response was immediate. Shock. Outrage. Support from unexpected places. People who had known her family for years but had never seen this side of them. Distant relatives who had always believed her mother's version of events. Now confronted with the truth. And then came the inevitable. A voicemail from her mother. Her voice laced with fury. How dare you humiliate us like this? You had no right. Emma listened in silence, her pulse steady. I have no right? She repeated softly, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. She called her mother back. You lied to everyone, she said the moment the call connected. You painted me as the villain. Twisted everything I did to make it seem like I abandoned you. After everything I've done for you. You abandoned us, her mother hissed, the anger barely contained. All because we chose to help Ethan and Olivia. They needed it more than you. Emma let out a slow breath, the final puzzle piece clicking into place. No, she said, her voice calm. You abandoned me the moment you decided my sacrifices meant nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. You've destroyed this family, her mother whispered finally. No, Emma replied, her voice steady. You did that yourself. She hung up, her heart racing, her hands trembling. But this time, it wasn't fear, it wasn't guilt, it was freedom. That night, Aunt Diane showed up at her door, her face lined with worry. Without a word, she wrapped Emma in a tight hug. I'm proud of you, she whispered. You deserve so much better. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, her eyes burning with unshed tears. For the first time, she believed it. She had lost a family that had never truly valued her. But in doing so, she had found something infinitely more valuable, herself. Emma sat on her couch, staring at her phone as the silence stretched between her and the rest of her family. Weeks had passed since she had made the decision to sever ties. To walk away from the toxic cycle of manipulation, financial dependency, and emotional neglect. And yet, the ghost of her family still lingered in her mind, whispering old wounds and half-forgotten memories. For the first time in years, her phone wasn't blowing up with messages from her mother, demanding money, nor was Olivia's number popping up with another plea for help disguised as an entitled expectation. There were no more passive-aggressive guilt trips. No more last-minute emergencies that somehow only she was responsible for fixing. The quiet should have been unnerving. But instead, it felt like a long-overdue relief. Still, the past had a way of creeping back in, no matter how firmly she tried to close the door on it. Whispers from distant relatives painted a bleak picture of her parents' circumstances. Her mother was working the early shift at a local diner, exhaustion evident in the deep lines etched into her face. Her father had taken a physically demanding job at a hardware store, far beyond what was healthy for his age. Ethan had quit yet another job, still refusing to take responsibility for his own failures. Olivia, ever the dreamer, was still clinging to the fantasy of becoming a social media influencer. Despite no real talent or drive to make it happen, Emma had expected some level of guilt to seep in when she heard about their struggles. A part of her, conditioned by years of manipulation, had braced itself for the inevitable pull of obligation. But it never came. Instead, there was only an overwhelming sense of clarity. She had spent years carrying them, sacrificing her own well-being to ensure their comfort. And when she had finally drawn a boundary, they had turned on her like she was disposable. No, she wouldn't feel guilty. Not now. Not ever again. As Christmas approached, she found herself alone for the first time in her life. In the past, the holidays had been an exhausting cycle of forced smiles, extravagant spending, and feeling like an outsider in her own family. This year, she decided it would be different. She invited close friends over. People who had stood by her, supported her, and never made her feel like she had to prove her worth. Aunt Diane was there, too, watching her with quiet pride as they toasted to new beginnings. The warmth of true companionship filled the room, laughter echoing through her apartment in a way that felt genuine rather than forced. For once, the holidays weren't about obligation or appearances. They were about her. As the night came to an end and her guests trickled out, Emma stood by the window, staring out at the city lights illuminating Portland. The past still lingered, a dull ache that might never fully disappear. But it no longer defined her. She had spent too long believing her worth was tied to what she could provide. That love was something she had to earn. But the truth was, real love didn't come with conditions. It didn't require her to bleed herself dry just to be seen. Her parents had tried to punish her by cutting her out of their will, by discarding her the moment she stopped being useful. But in doing so, they had unknowingly given her the greatest gift of all, freedom. They had left everything they owned to Ethan and Olivia. But what did that really mean? A house that would eventually crumble under mismanagement? A lake cottage that would fall into disrepair because neither of them knew how to maintain it? Let them have it. Let them live in the fantasy they had built for themselves, where consequences were someone else's problem. Emma had something far more valuable than property or inheritance. She had herself. Months passed, and her family's toxic shadow finally began to fade from her everyday reality. Silence no longer felt like an absence but rather a peaceful reclaiming of her own life. The guilt trips, the manipulations, the endless cycle of being the fixer, those chains had been broken. With her newfound financial freedom, she finally took the long overdue trip to Italy she had always dreamed of. Standing on a balcony in Florence, the city bathed in golden light, she allowed herself to truly exhale. She had spent so much of her life waiting for validation, waiting for approval, waiting for a love that was never freely given. But she wasn't waiting anymore. She was living. Back home, she embraced the simple joys of life that had always been out of reach before. She joined a hiking group, filling her weekends with adventures rather than obligations. She let herself indulge in things she had always denied herself, luxury dinners, spontaneous getaways, even dating again. It was during one of those hikes that she met Alex. Someone who saw her not for what she could provide, but for who she truly was. His quiet support filled a void she hadn't even realized was still there. For the first time in her life, love felt uncomplicated. Months passed, and then, one cold November evening, there was an unexpected knock on her door. When she opened it, Aunt Diane stood there, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand, wearing that familiar worried expression. Without a word, Diane stepped inside and hugged her. "I'm proud of you, Emma," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You deserve all the happiness you can find." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, blinking back unexpected tears. "I still think about them," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I regret walking away, but because it still hurts, knowing they never really loved me like I loved them." Aunt Diane squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes, family isn't about blood, sweetheart. It's about the people who truly say you're worth." Her words settled deep, resonating in a way that filled a lingering emptiness Emma hadn't even realized remained. As they sat together, sharing stories and laughter, Emma finally understood. She hadn't lost a family. She had gained the freedom to build one that truly valued her. In the weeks that followed, whispers of her parents' struggles continued to reach her. They were working harder than ever. Yet their financial situation was steadily crumbling without her support. Ethan remained irresponsible, always looking for someone else to clean up his messes. Olivia, bitter and resentful, clung to her delusions of online fame. They had chosen this path. Emma wasn't responsible for fixing it. On Christmas Eve, rather than dwelling on regret or bitterness, she celebrated. She filled her home with warmth, laughter, and people who loved her for who she was, not what she could give. As the night came to an end, she stood alone by her window, watching the city lights flicker against the darkness. The pain of betrayal was still there, a lingering scar rather than a fresh wound. But that pain had shaped her into someone stronger. Someone who wasn't afraid to honor her own worth. Her parents had tried to punish her by cutting her off. But in the end, their rejection had been her greatest liberation. Emma's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is walking away. She spent years sacrificing for a family that never truly valued her, believing that if she gave enough, she would finally be seen. But real love, whether from family, friends, or partners, does not come with conditions. It does not require you to destroy yourself to prove your worth. The hardest lesson she learned was that boundaries are not betrayal. They are an act of self-preservation. When she finally said, enough, she freed herself from the cycle of emotional and financial manipulation, reclaiming the life she had worked so hard to build. And in doing so, she discovered what true happiness looks like, one where she chooses who and what deserves her energy. If there's anything to take away from Emma's journey, it's this: your worth is not measured by what you can give to people who refuse to appreciate it. It is defined by your own sense of self-respect and the courage to walk away from what no longer serves you. What do you think about Emma's decision? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you love stories of resilience and justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more inspiring content.